My name is Rebecca. I'm one of the family lawyers and a family mediator here at Connect Family Law. And this is Simon Kent. He's a partner at Connect Family Law. And we have a topic we want to talk about today that is actually quite controversial.
Yep. And that topic is to do with shared parenting and whether upon a separation and divorce, there should be a presumption that each parent parent their children equally.
Right.
So they get basically 50% of the time in one house, 50% in another. Although you were saying earlier to me that shared parenting can be anywhere between 40-60.
Yes, it doesn't have to be exactly 50-50. A shared parenting arrangement is where both parents have at least 40% of the time with the kids.
Well, we don't have a lot of time today, and this is a huge topic. We could talk for probably an hour, or we could take phone calls on it, but we're not going to do that today. I'm just going to quickly give my sense of why I think there should be presumed shared parenting, and you can rebut it.
Sure.
Okay. So when I was going through separation and divorce, I had to work for a number of years to get to a place where I had shared parenting with my children. And I felt as I was going through that just didn't really feel fair that it was up to me to fight so hard to get to that place. And it would have saved me and our family a ton of emotional turmoil and pain and a lot of money if we had just started off from the presumption that I was a good dad. I mean, I was a good dad while we were married. Why is that all of a sudden not the case now that we're not married? Why do I have to fight for my kids half time, just to see them half time? So if there had been a presumption built in already, then I think my ex would have had a much harder time trying to change that, we'll say. And I also, and the second quick point is that I think we as a society should expect both parents to support their children and to parent their children. So, we don't want a situation where it's just too easy for dads to sort of give up. Oh, this is too much. I don't have the money. I don't have the financial the emotional resources to deal with this. I'm out of here. If parents, and in this case I'm speaking about men, felt more supported in that moment, we might see more of an engagement with them in families going through this separation and divorce.
Right, and I agree with a lot of what you've said, but I guess the difference is that if you're setting up a presumption, then it makes one parent having to argue that presumption shouldn't apply in their family. And so one of the reasons why they haven't created a presumption like that is because it's really important that the decisions made for a family are very specific to that individual child. Right. So a presumption is, this is going to apply to everyone in most cases, and then you've got to prove that you're the exception. In that case, you have a parent who could be the vulnerable parent, the one with less finances, particularly if there's family violence involved in the family, having to show that the shared parenting situation isn't in the best interest of their child. So that's a big societal concern that they've had when they're drafting the legislation. But I think the other point is that there's many factors that are looked at when you look at what's in the best interest of a child. Right. The history of their care, which could have been a shared situation, or one parent could have been very not engaged hardly at all. So the history of their care, the views of the child, especially when they're older, their need for stability, family violence, the ability of each parent, maybe there's mental health issues or addiction issues, and then they also do look at the emotional well-being of the child. And I would say that the place where the courts have changed quite a bit is that now they do presume, based on the research that's out there, that it is, in the vast majority of cases, it's really in the best interest of a child from an emotional perspective to have both parents really engaged and to have as much contact as possible with both parents. But that is only one of the factors. It's got to be weighed out with the other ones as well. So those are some of the concerns with actually putting the presumption in place. But I do, I get your frustration. I've had lots of clients where that is a frustrating piece, especially dads who find it quite frustrating when when they're walking through the courts. There is change, there has been change, and that's continuing to develop. But at this point, even with the new Divorce Act that's coming in, they decided again not to put that presumption in place.
Well, it's my hope that one day that will change. I know in different jurisdictions around the world, things are approached differently, and maybe Canada will get on board with that at some point in the future. And maybe I should run for Prime Minister so that I can actually make that change, because that literally would be the first thing I did when I got into office.
Well, I guess the caution there is just that the approach in BC is really less about the rights of parents and all about what's in the best interest of the child. The focus is on the child in all decisions that are made about parenting, and not about the rights of fathers or mothers, but seeing the parents as having a responsibility for their children, and how will that best work out for this child. So in many cases that does mean a really engaged, shared situation, but there are a number of situations where that's not what's best for a child.
Well, let me say something about that. So in the best interest of the child,
Yes.
are actually, when you're looking at that, it's actually broader, I think, broader in scope than just focusing like a laser on the child. If you look at the parents, and again, I'm going to speak for dads, if you have a situation where you have a dad who's only seeing their kids, say, 20% of the time, I can tell you from firsthand experience, that is incredibly dark and sad to not see your children post separation like that. And what happens to individuals who are going through that? It's a great loss and a sort of almost like a depression that comes from that. And so that person, that father in my scenario, is no longer a functioning member of the family. And it actually perpetuates itself. The father starts to go down, is really so sad about the whole thing that they're unable to parent in the first place, and therefore it's not in the best interest of the child. So just to look at the child and to say, oh, dad only spent 30% of this, looking after the kid when they were married, that was then. Now the dad has got to pull up his socks, and he's got to be told, you now have the kid 50% of the time. If you don't have the ability to raise them and understand what to do, go and get courses, go and get support, from our healthcare professionals. But you had this child, you're getting divorced, now you have to support this kid 50% of the time and be there. And that's good for the child, it's good for the parent.
Right, and I mean, you're an engaged, intelligent, compassionate person and father, and so in your case that makes sense. And I guess the difference is that there's many families where that's not the case. And so how do you protect children that may be at risk, or children that may be in a situation where the dad actually does want the time more for a break in child support, or just for the equality perspective of things, and then the child's going to sit in daycare while he's at work, or like those sorts of circumstances do happen. And so how do you balance out what you're talking about, which may very well be a situation where shared parenting should occur and would be best for the child, and those where there's a risk of violence or neglect, or a mother having to prove something when she has very, very little financial ability to be able to go to the courts and say, actually, this is why shared parenting wouldn't be good for our child. Right. She's in a situation where she's not only perhaps a victim of violence herself, but then also financially incapable of fighting that or doing well in court in that way. So there really is a balance, and I guess at this point, the courts are thinking through these topics, and many judges that I'm before, even though that presumption doesn't exist, will say, well, tell me why this shouldn't be shared.
Great.
And so there are judges and mediators, and particularly when you go to divorce coaches who are therapists that can help with parenting plans, those sorts of people are really engaged in this issue, but we just have to make sure that it is also very individualized to the family.
Okay. Well, very interesting. Thanks.
So if you have some thoughts on this, if you're struggling because you're a dad and you are really, wanting to have more time with your child, or you just want to work through a parenting plan outside of court, and have some of these thoughts be part of the decisions that you're making, here at Connect, we'd love to help you out, and give us a call.
Great. Thanks, everybody.